You see what I mean? I have to follow Mike Edson. So bear with me while I set my presentation up. Did anyone else Google museums make me cry? Much more results, but for an entirely different reason. So, we are going to iterate down on some of the things, the topics that Mike covered, and talk about the Horizon report, assuming that I can launch this app. Thank you, Mike. That was spectacular. And Mike will be up after this session. Mike will be up for a kind of a round-off panel. So the format of this session is I'm going to give you an introduction to the Horizon report, tell you how it's created, what it is, and what's in it. And then the luminaries of the education, interpretation, digital strategy, museum world will come up and discuss it. So it's going to be more of a discussion rather than much formal presentation. And my fellow panelists, even though I'm moderating, have no idea what questions I'm going to ask them. And actually, I don't have any idea of the questions that I'm going to ask them, because we're going to kind of play Wheel of Fortune. So let me first of all start off by telling you what the Horizon report is. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to share with you my favorite quote about technology, which is how I try and convey the real requirement here and try and instill some urgency into folks that I talk to. So this is I'm going to change one word. This is a quote from Terminator. This is Kyle Reese protecting Sarah Connor. So here's the quote. Listen and understand. I'm going to change one word. That technology is out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. That is what we are dealing with. If you have some notion that all this kind of digital stuff is, we're just trying it for a while and then we'll go back to a pastoral existence, you are wrong. So the Horizon report. The New Media Consortium, based in Austin, Texas, for the last 15 years or so, has been producing a report initially for the higher education world. And the format of the report was to talk about technologies, trends, and challenges that are affecting that field. And it's called Horizon because those things are split into horizons of 0 to 1 years, 2 to 3 years, and 4 to 5 years. And they're really important things that industry need to think about, giving the information kind of at the executive level of how to think about technology and what's important. So there have been 48 editions of the Horizon report and 55 translations. In 5 years ago, we're on our 5th Horizon report for museums. So about 5 years ago, New Media Consortium started looking at the museum field and started creating a version of that report specifically targeted at the museum community, particularly around education interpretation and the use of technology around that. So really what we have is, it's 13 years of global research into emerging technology adoption. And that's really what this report is to help inform those who otherwise may not be informed about this kind of stuff, help you make decisions. So BPOC is very proud to partner with and sponsor the Horizon report, the 2015 edition. New Media Consortium, we're looking for a partner to bring this unbelievably valuable tool to the museum community, and so last year, following discussions, BPOC is sponsoring this report. And there are 2 versions of the report. Here's where you can download them. Some shortened URL here, gonmc.org 2015/muse. But you could also text, heaven forbid, Balboa Horizon to 56512, and that will give you a link to the reports. So there are 2 versions of the report. One is this kind of standard format report, and the second is a Balboa Park Centennial edition, which features really a forward about how Balboa Park is, or how all the technologies, trends, and challenges are playing out in Balboa Park. So I encourage you to download the Balboa Park one. So as you read the report, it will take you on a journey that is remarkably similar to the 7 stages of grief. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, but hopefully at the end of it, you will have acceptance that this really is an informative publication to help you make decisions around this, this new stuff. So here's the process. It's a Delphi framework, or Delphi if you want to abuse the Queen's English. So it starts off with an orientation. There are 50 peers selected every year to take part in this process. And this year's report involved an international cast of characters. So it all happens on a wiki. The New Media Consortium team provide information, press clippings, reports, all those kinds of things that are consumed by the peer group. And then we have the 4 questions, which are the most important technologies to museum education and interpretation, what's missing, so plucked from the field, what are the key trends affecting the adoption of these technologies in terms of education and interpretation, and then what are the significant challenges. We go through a project, a ranking process to select all that accumulated stuff. We then play Survivor and vote them off. And then we have a second pass of rankings, and we come up with the report. So anybody who hasn't read the report, who's not familiar with this report, I truly encourage you to download it and take a look at it. It's like so popular. So of the last 10,000 downloads, this is the geographic distribution. The daily average for the accumulation of reports is over 13,500 a day. So again, as Mike talked about scale, that's pretty good scale for the museum community. So here's how the report is broken down. It's trends, challenges, and technologies. In terms of trends, again, each of these areas are split into issues of policy, leadership, and practice as a way of defining the discussions around those coming up with the trends. And I'll read a quote here, bear with me. So while long-term impact trends have already been the topic of many museum education leaders' discussions and extensive research, short-term impact trends often do not have an abundance of concrete evidence pointing to their effectiveness and future directions. So the trends, again, are put into short, medium, and long-term, so that gives you the ability to kind of look at how these things are playing out. In terms of technologies, and I love this picture, which kind of captures the issue of legacy technology that we all have to deal with if you've got this kind of Victorian iPad computer going on. So the technologies are split. The core bulk of research that the peer group goes through includes these types of technologies. So it's from a broad array of consumer technologies, strategies, internet technologies, enabling technologies, learning technologies, and visualization technologies, and social media technologies. And so the group goes through discussions all around these things. And as much as this process produces this incredibly valuable report that distills all the discussion around all this stuff is available open access on the wiki. So you can see how these discussions play out and why things are included and why things are excluded. So here's we live in the world of kind of visualization and capturing things in neat graphics. So I'm going to take you through in a little more detail what the actual trends, challenges, and technologies are. So in terms of trends, as I said, split into 3 levels: short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And we're going to get in, so as we go into the discussion, I'm going to get into deeper, and by the titles you'll probably understand exactly what these trends are inferring, and we're going to get into detail as we play Wheel of Fortune with these. So short-term impacts, expanding the concept of the visitor. There's a great article from the Australasian Museum Directors group that gives a statistic that is 70% of the 51 million visits to museums in Australia for the fiscal year 2015, 70% of those visits were online. Kind of sounds weird, doesn't it? That they just think about visitors in this big glob and then just say, well, a percentage engaged with us purely online. Increasing focus on participatory experiences. So and this is an interesting, why are museums having to do participatory experiences? And so let me give you an example. So think of television. Mike talked about television and the lost hours watching it. So think of what television used to be. It used to be this highly curated, packaged event where you were told exactly what to think and do. But now, if you look at the most successful television shows, I know this is going to kill you, but X Factor, So You Think You Can Dance, American Idol, those are participatory experiences. So the millions of viewers who are watching that are engaging in this participatory experience where they could actually be part of that show. They can control the narrative arc of that show through voting, and they can ultimately determine the outcome. There is an expectation when consuming content that it's participatory and that the emerging demographics have control over that experience. So midterm impacts. Marsha talked extensively about this morning. It's about collective action, about cross-institutional collaboration, which is no more apparent than my organization, BPOC. Increasing focus on data analytics for museums operations. We used to think about how data collection happens right now. It's kind of visitor surveys, and it's a little inadequate. But we now have the power to have really comprehensive and accurate information about what's going on in our institutions, both behind the front-facing and back-facing areas. So long-term impacts. Expanding the boundaries of creativity. So not only do artists now have many more tools with which to manifest their creative expression, but also many more tools for museums to help audiences engage with that art. And we'll talk about that. And then the rise of private companies in museum education. And Mike talked about Museum Hack as one of those companies coming into the museum space, into the education space, and assisting museums in that engagement. So then let's talk about challenges. So Marsha talked about wicked challenges earlier on. So this is how the challenges are organized in the report. So hard to understand, hard to solve, easy to solve. So here's the matrix. So if something is easy to understand and easy to solve, it's solvable. It's easy. That was easy. Some free advertising for Staples there. So if it's easy to understand, but maybe hard to solve, it's difficult. I'll read that if you can't read that. Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in high heels. I know the feeling. I don't really. If it's hard to understand, and if we can understand it, it may be easy to solve, it's wicked. And it's really hard to understand what that guy was thinking about transporting those bricks. So I know what you're thinking. What if it's hard to understand and hard to solve? So we don't even talk about those ones. And actually, what I love about this picture is that guy who clearly must be a museum professional. There's this impending catastrophic event, and he's got his hands in his pockets. Sorry, that was a little disingenuous. That just means he knows everything's going to be all right. So, easy to understand, hard to solve, easy to solve. So here are the 6 challenges. Easy to understand, easy to solve. Developing digital strategies. One of the most important things museums should be doing right now as you think about how to engage with your audiences, particularly for emerging generations. Improving digital literacy of museum professionals. The only way that you're going to address that friction between what's going on inside your institution and the changing world outside is professional development. And I'll share with you my favorite quote about training in the museum environment. So the CFO says, "What happens if we train staff and they leave?" And the CEO says, "What happens if we don't and they stay?" Just let that sink in for you. So easy to understand, hard to solve, difficult. What's here? Balancing our connected and unconnected lives. And museums are really best placed to figure out that. How do you create an engaging experience that doesn't involve any technology if people want to disconnect from technology. But then how do you provide that layer for that, that emerging demographic that we want to engage and bring into our institutions? How do we make that connection? And measuring the impact of new technologies. How do we measure how effective what we're doing in this arena is? Wicked. Hard to understand, and if we can understand it, potentially easy to solve. Privacy concerns. As institutions start collecting data about museums, there are some massive privacy issues going on right now. You look at the data breaches in those big organizations. You think about organizations that are capturing visitor data en masse, like Dallas Museum of Art, their Friends program, capturing data. There's some serious privacy concerns around that, which may prevent us kind of engaging wholesale in that arena. And then maintaining progress in technology, workflows, and infrastructure. How do you keep pace with this changing technology, which is, we can barely keep up with, 5 or 10 years ago, let alone what's going on out in the world now. So those are the challenges. So technology. Again, split into 0 to 1 years, 2 to 3 years, and 4 to 5 years. So in the near term, bring your own device. Museums getting out of the hardware business in delivering, interpretive and educational content and allowing the visitors to use their own device within our organizations, as well as employees bringing their own technology, which again is an emerging trend in many industries. Games and gamification. How do we compete with that multi-billion-dollar industry that is teaching our kids or providing them with really high production value engaging games? And we'll talk about that, assuming the Wheel of Fortune picks that topic. Location-based services, that's how bringing technologies into the galleries, understanding where people are in your galleries. Beacon technology is currently emerging as a way of figuring out what visitors are doing in our institutions. Makerspaces. We have a makerspace, Maker Fair coming to Balboa Park in October. Lots of museums are looking at the makerspace environment as a way of educating and connecting with audiences. Makerspaces, Maker Fairs are massive. Natural user interfaces. Even now with your mobile device, you're doing pinch and zoom, but that's a natural user interface. And there are technologies coming along which will accelerate that. Think of speech recognition. I have 2 teenage daughters, and all they do is talk to their smartphones, which is a little unsuccessful for me unless I put on a fake American accent. You think I'm joking. All that technology, it's all algorithmic, and it was all done in North America. You don't want to hear my American accent. And the Internet of Things. Devices coming alive, being connected to the Internet, having sensors, understanding where they are, and measuring, and providing measurement and data for us to collect. So those are the technologies. So here's the Wheel of Fortune. These are all the trends, all the challenges and technologies kind of assembled. And a couple of things as I was looking at this, before I introduce our panel. The connections. As I was looking at all these technologies, connections clearly between bring your own device, gaming, and location-based services. And then connecting these other things, Internet of Things, brings up privacy issues. Data analytics is going to come from location-based services. And then when I really thought about it, digital strategies really connects everything to everything else. That's really one of the core things that should be going on in our institutions. And really with that is about digital literacy, a real fat connection between those two things. So that's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to encourage you to call out these topics. So think about that as I introduce our panel. Mike's been up. So for this one, I'm going to invite Amy Heibel, who is the Vice President of Technology, Web and Digital Media at LACMA. Amy, please come to the stage. Alex Freeman is the New Media Consortium's Director of Membership and Programs and is, I think, singularly responsible for writing the report. Is that true? One of 3, right? One of 3. So please pick a seat. And Joaquin Ortiz. Full disclosure, Joaquin is on my board, so whatever he says is right. So please take a seat, and I'm gonna moderate from up here. So let's play Wheel of Fortune. So, there's some examples for each of these things. You can probably see some of these graphics. So, what is on? And again, this is the scary part for the panel. I didn't introduce their buyers, but they are. This panel was my first choice, and it's not usual that the first people you call up and say, "Can you join this panel?" say yes, but they all did, and I'm immensely grateful for them coming today. And they have a wealth of skill and talent and information and experience in all this. So I encourage you, under this framework of all these trends, challenges, and technologies, to consume what they have to say. So, what's burning on everyone's mind? What do you want us to start talking about? Alex? Privacy concerns. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, so there we go. Sorry? Mike has volunteered. Let me give you this.
Smart enough to use it. Wow, that's good. Yeah.
Why do you have to?
Yeah. I jumped up and down just because I was asked this question yesterday. What day is it? Yeah. So I think the whole privacy anonymity debate is shaped by the for-profit online sector, digital sector, whose primary purpose in most cases is to aggregate huge audiences. And it kind of warps the discussion a bit. And I think our sector, mission-driven and focused, targeted mainly on social outcomes, has a different take on it. Where our users, people, we need Sharon Leon from the Center for History and New Media was trying to crowdsource a better term for them than users or people or visitors. But these are co-citizens, often come to us voluntarily. We do have a trusted sort of social contract with them, but privacy anonymity is not as huge an issue, I think, in our sector as you would be led to believe by reading Forbes or the New York Times or Mashable.
I think that some of this comes up because we're going to have to reshape the conversation in time to demonstrate that trust to the public, because it is an issue of trust. And I think one of the challenges, for instance, we've rolled out some new programs here and are trying to collect a lot more personal data around our visitors so that we can be in contact with them in the long run. And our front desk staff are called fascists for asking for email addresses. And it's funny because some of them are actually sitting right here. I'm looking at a couple of them right now. And so it's pretty crazy because it's been so consumed by the capitalist culture that we're having to play catch up. It's one of these things that happens a lot in our culture, and museum cultures, we're behind the curve. And we need to actually, in some ways, put a message around it and promote that, and not just individual institutions, but as a culture on the wider whole.
Anyone else? I'm going to, while you're thinking, let me share with this fantastic quote about big data, because as we enter big data, this is going to be a real problem. Big data is like teenage sex. Everyone talks about it, nobody really knows how to do it, everyone thinks everyone else is doing it, so everyone claims they are doing it. Thought you'd appreciate that. But really, as you get into big data, and we've had these issues from the telecom companies, tracking us, there are some huge issues, but I take Mike's point that it may not be the issue that we think it is. Alex?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Cool, thanks. So both in privacy concerns of individual privacy data and that kind of thing, and some of what you were talking about, Mike, with the Black Matter and all that kind of thing, everybody's posting YouTube videos and all that kind of things. How does this then affect also the whole digital copyright concerns, what is allowed to be published, public domain? I know working for the Youth Symphony, we deal with that a lot on what we're allowed to use and not use, and even what we keep parents from posting or anything like that as part of this Black Matter, because of our understanding of, well, no, it can't be posted without permission and rights and all that kind of thing. So how do you see the conversation around, copyright infringement and anything like that? Do we see a shift in how that is handled or viewed or even matters anymore?
Give you one quick one, and I know other people have a different take on it. So the COPA, Child Online Protection Privacy Act, is sacrosanct law and very clear and very good, I think. That being, so there's that aspect of it. Another is a rising sensitivity as we ask our customers to be co-creators with us, that we not try and monopolize and claim copyright over our jointly created content. There are a number of sites that do crowdsourcing and online transcriptions that then try to wrap their arms around and monetize in kind of an unhealthy way the contributions of the public. I like Tim O'Reilly's quote, "Create more value than you capture," as kind of a pole star in that regard. And then we can get into maybe in another question of the whole copyright wars and open content and all that maybe has a different spin on it. But
Amy, do you want to say anything about, I know you're participating in the DMA Friends program. Is there any issues, if you had any discussions in your institution around
privacy? Not so much. I mean, for us, the DMA Friends program is a way for us to participate in joint software creation with a number of other partners and to use that software to measure engagement. So we are really good at knowing what happens up to the point that a visitor purchases a ticket and enters the venue. And we're good at knowing what they do online, but we haven't traditionally been very good at knowing what they do when they're in the museum. And so the software is a way for us to invite them to participate in activities and to track that and to reward that, and also to pool that data with other institutions so we can see what kind of educational activities are really appealing to our audience. We're, by the way, piloting with our free kids membership community, which is over 100,000 members under the age of 18. Not all the partners are doing that. For DMA, it's all-encompassing strategy. But it's really interesting to look at the engagement data side by side. We obviously, because we're dealing with minors, take great care with their privacy. But that's been true in everything that we've done for years. I think around copyright, there are really interesting questions right now. For us, we've tried to shift to thinking about it from a point of view of transparency. Like, we want to make sure that the things that we hold in stewardship, the world knows about and has access to. That's particularly true of images, but we're also equally committed to artist copyright, and that's true in our grant-making activities with artists as well as online. But I think, I think that that's a world where there's a lot of discussion happening right now. It's far from fixed. We had this really interesting situation where we went to a 560 pixel image on the web, which is a great deal bigger than the going definition of a thumbnail. And we thought, we're not sure how some of the living artists in our collection are going to feel about that, but the public can't see what we have unless we can use a decent image online. And the only artist that we heard from was Ellsworth Kelly, who called in, or had a studio call and say, "I love the website, I love the bigger image. Finally, people can see what my work looks like. By the way, I'd like to color correct it and get you over a better quality image now that it's big and gorgeous." So I think there's that. I think where things are authored and where the voice belongs to an individual, or where where it's somebody's creative vision, whether that's our public or an artist in our collection, we treat that differently. But when it's an object that we hold in stewardship and the public can only see it when we have it on display in the galleries, I think we take really seriously that we have a moral obligation to be transparent about that.
I love that you use the word transparency, because again, that's what it is. It's that communication that we build around our audiences and explaining them what we're going through, whether it's why we need their information so we can build a relationship with them, or it's about explaining them how we can and can't use an image, whether that means in the galleries versus online and all those places. And of course, then how are we doing that? What's our strategy for bringing that communication out to the public right now? Because a lot of our institutions aren't even thinking about that. We're just frightened that if we put it online, it'll get reproduced and we'll be sued. And we're gonna have to start opening up those conversations. And there's new areas where we can grow and try new things.
A lot of what's happening is a generational thing too. You think about some of the younger visitors that engage with the museum are using things that cover their digital footprints a little bit more. So things like Snapchat are becoming, our museums are starting to explore that, and how can they work in that space, because some of your audience is in that space already. And so you'll start seeing increasing use within different platforms like Snapchat where it's it disappears.
Nan, do you have another topic, or you want to?
Another topic?
Kid.
Participatory experiences. We all know there are many forms of participation And I'm wondering if you might share some particularly intriguing examples or rare and little-known species of participation, maybe especially bridging digital and analog worlds.
I'll share one. I think one of my frustrations after spending a couple decades in museums is that too often I think invitations to participate mean we have the content and now we want to know what you think of it. And it's sort of an invitation to compliment us on the quality of what we have to offer. I think that's a very thin form of participation. So we've started giving grants to artists who want to work with new technology to come into the museum and to create a project. But in doing that, we emphasize to them that we don't care if they ever create a finished work of art in their time in that program. What we do care about is that there are opportunities for the public to participate in some way. And we left open the definition of what that might mean. And I frankly didn't know what they might come up with. And it's been really interesting to see what the artists think of when they think about participation, because it's really deep and it's all over the place. And it's everything from crowdsourcing aspects of the thinking that goes into their piece to having people participate in the actual making, to having very high-level conversations with the public about the problems that the artist is encountering in the making of the piece. And it's been fascinating to watch that, because I think I realized that inadvertently perhaps we had underestimated our audience and the sophistication of what they can bring to the creative process, and how much they want a backdoor to the museum to come in and to have their own form of creativity, whatever that might be. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's scientific research, maybe it's engineering, maybe they're a poet, but to have a place to pool that together with other people who are productive and creative in different ways. It's been really humbling, I think, and I think we could do a lot more of that.
I've got 4. Wikipedia editathons. So when I'm cranking these out, think about the value creation eras. So there's always this hidden, unspoken presumption that all the value creation eras have to point back into us, and I think that's crap. I think that sells everyone short. So Wikipedia editathons, they're festive. It's truly the wisdom of crowds. The results scale fabulously. It's win-win everywhere. It's like a self-baking cake that you get to eat all day long. I was watching a documentary about Christo and his wife for the Wrapped Pont Neuf in Paris. And if you watch that, for Christo and his wife, Jean-Claude? No, yeah. The levels of participation there are, in terms of scale, so huge and so immersive. There are these films of these people, strangers meeting in the streets and arguing about the essential nature of human existence and artistic creation, and it's so totally engaged, and it makes a lot of the stuff that we do and we think is participatory seem insignificant. So that, and then the museo, I used them in my talk, Museo Mix, digital invasions. The call to action in digital invasion is find an institution you love and stage an invasion there. It's this sort of with us thing. It's co-created. It's very loving and very complete. So I think those kinds of examples are very attractive to me because they point out the thinness. Did you use the word thin or brittle? The thinness of everything else.
One of the examples I think of is the Cooper Hewitt Museum and their online collection. So they acknowledge the fact that they don't know everything about all the objects in their collection. So if you go and look at something and you have images on Flickr, or if you have had 3D scans of an image, or you have some information that you can, kind of that Wikipedia editathon kind of idea of somebody actually crowdsourcing to build information on a collection. And switching gears from art museums, design museums, into science museums, citizen science is a big thing that's going on, and getting individuals involved, like the Boston Museum of Science. They have a Firefly Watch, so it's a way of using technology to capture more information about how changes in habitats are happening. So citizen science is, I think, a big one.
Science science makes me think Encyclopedia of Life is Edward O. Wilson started the project to have a wiki page for every species on Earth. No institution has the capacity to do that on their own. They require photographers, enthusiasts, unaffiliated researchers all over the world just to pretend to try and accomplish that goal. That's participation.
Just up on the screen we have the Nats just launched a citizen science framework, which, and we have the Nat in the house. Woo. Okay. Truly excellent framework there.
I think it's that level, it's respecting that level of sophistication that you brought up. You know, so we did a crowdsourced exhibition 2012, and the user feedback that we found out from the visitors was that they wanted more from us. That, you know, that it wasn't just seeing the images, but they wanted to know more. Like if we're going to ask them to be in a curatorial role, then we need to provide them all those tools. And we didn't have the resources and capacity and infrastructure to do that at the time. And now we're trying to build new participatory experiences that are built into that, which meant taking a deeper step away from just in-gallery participation or online participation to literally like bringing the community in and saying, how can we do this better with you? And we're doing that especially right now with teens, because we really think that they kind of see this world in multiple dimensions, and they play that crux where they can see it younger than them and older than them, and they're helping to us to inform, because they are sophisticated, and the things they tell us back are shocking, not because there's something we didn't, that's bad, but because it's something we didn't expect. We didn't expect that they could think on that higher level. But there are things that also kind of, you know, that we have assumed may not be true. You know, Deborah, who you guys saw earlier, asked them, you know, well, where do you want to see your art? And they all said YouTube. And that kind of caught us off guard, but it's because they understand the value of YouTube way better than we do on a certain level, and that's kind of frightening because we're trying to play catch up. But by involving them now more into the actual planning process, now we can build those experiences that will be meaningful for them. So,
Next topic, Deborah.
So I'm actually interested in the larger outside the circle, because as you can see just from the two that you've presented, there's a lot of depth to each one of these topics. But as a director, I need to take into account, which of these are more important? You know, 5 years ago, it was all about the technologies. But clearly, the challenges, and we have to be aware of the trends. In the for-profit field, they have the financial resources to do the in-depth research, to figure some of this out. Nonprofits don't. So how do we make the right decisions? How do we balance technology trends and challenges?
Well, let me just go for it. I mean, what you're seeing certainly in the museum technology community, who have been struggling for quite some time in getting technology and digital strategy out from, you know, those hidden basement rooms. And chasing after technology is a fool's errand. And so the overarching strategy is to disconnect all this stuff from the technologies. You know, if you look at how technology progresses, it's in this kind of cyclical, 2007 the iPhone, 2010 the tablet, 2013 Google Glass, which wasn't very successful. Great example of, if you attached like DeYoung, went for a Google Glass framework to deliver some of their interpretive content. Now, if you've done that, you need to be in a situation where that the loss of that technology or the loss of support for that technology does not disrupt your institution. So how do you track, without the massive financial investment, how do you track what's going on outside your institution with what's going on inside? And it's all about professional development and training and bringing in the right people who don't have any encumbrance to understand what's going on outside. Whether it's hiring younger people, whether it's looking to develop, professionally develop your staff through informal learning networks. You've got to figure out how to free up the friction between how institutions operate now and how they need to operate in that ever kind of constantly changing world outside.
I mean, for me, yeah, it's the digital literacy aspect, and that's why we need people like Michael, because look,
and it was harder. Like 5 or 6 years ago, there were fewer successful experiments. I think now the path to being just really good 1.0 institution that super serves your best audiences is you can do it, and it yields to the kind of workshop-y, talky, consulty processes. The real trick then is once you got a plan, 90% of all change initiatives fail. Execution is, and that's what was so incredibly impressive about David's presentation this morning. Yeah, just that level of forgive me, I don't mean it to be a pejorative in any ways, common sense execution around fundamentals over long periods of time. That's beautiful to me, better than any highfalutin three-piece suit wearing strategy on earth. Yeah, that was a really great way to start.
Marcia.
I just wonder, I don't want to lose the point that Mike made. I wanted also to add the point that Mike made in his dark matter talk, which is some of it, I know this doesn't sound like it's easy, but some of it is our own failure of imagination, I think. Sort of, what could we be? I remember Mike talking once at the Smithsonian about, and I've heard the secretary of the Smithsonian say, well, if James Smithson died 3 years ago, what would he have envisioned as an entity to promote the promotion of knowledge and research and learning? And it probably wouldn't have been 10 different buildings on the National Mall. So I think it's a real hang-up, and I struggle with it too, but I don't want to lose that in the conversation.
I think, part of the challenge is, museums are used to kind of large course correction changes. You live in this world of these kind of annual budgets and that kind of slow movement. But if you look at how fast stuff changes outside, part of the challenge is how do you get more nimble, and a lot of this stuff that we're talking about is about being opportunistic. It's about what are the technologies out there that you can take your collection, utilize, and connect with your audience. So it seems like it's difficult, and I think one of the mistakes that I see museums try to make, certainly as they think about digital stuff, is so how do we layer digital on top of what we're doing right now? And that's totally the wrong approach, because that's just going to increase the friction. So it's more about how do you completely embed digital into your organization. And it is about literacy. It's about figuring out how to get and that's why I love the program that has been put together today. Kudos to the Leadership Institute, because a lot of it is about the experience and customer engagement, and David's talk was spectacular in terms of how do you embed that in your organization, that philosophy, just everything that he said. Just think about how you could do that within your organization around becoming digital, which is really about being opportunistic, being nimble, being creative, being risk averse, all those other things. Forget about the technology.
I just want to add one quick thing, which is that a couple of you touched on this, but I think as institutions, we exhaust ourselves chasing the next new technology, or feeling like we have to fully grasp and exploit the next consumer technology. And I think that's wrong. I think there are design thinking and other processes that remind us that what we really need to do is figure out what is the problem that we're trying to address for the visitor. In our museum, we could think of lots of new ways to tell stories on emerging platforms. But if we go out and talk to our visitor, they're struggling, for example, because the galleries are an uncomfortable environment. They can't sit down. They can't push a stroller and figure out how to use our map at the same time. Our elevators aren't labeled correctly. And I think we lose track of that, and I think it helps to go back to them and really drill down and figure out what does it feel like for them to be here in their leisure time, and what problem do we need to solve for them before we go, kill ourselves because we think that we don't have a strategy that includes Apple Watches. Maybe we should think about what does it really mean to make this a welcoming environment for people. And then, as you say, if you're building digital literacy in the organization, then digital naturally becomes part of the solution to that. But digital won't tell you what the problem is. People tell you what the problem is.
Yeah, adding on to what Nick was saying, within looking at strategies, like having a digital strategy may not be the idea, because then you're separating digital strategy from kind of a strategic plan. And digital is an aspect of everything we do. It's part of society. It's the world we live in right now. The other side is that is to really think about what's happening in society. I think Marcia's talk earlier today was talking about what kind of societal trends are happening. Like if we were to base a digital strategy on MySpace back in 2006, I mean, yeah, that wouldn't have lasted very long. But if you start looking at what's underlying that, this idea of social networks, this idea of connecting with other people, well then that's still happening now. So the idea is to look at those societal trends and how might a museum work with that rather than a specific technology like we need to get on an Apple Watch.
Yeah. You just reminded me, Alex, there's the book Art and Fear. Did I get that title right? Yeah, Art and Fear. And there's an experiment that they talk about in Art and Fear where a ceramics teacher divides his class in half. Half the class, he says, you will be graded at the end of the semester on one piece. Do anything you want, but I'm going to grade you on one final piece. That's your grade for the semester. The other half, I'm going to grade you by the poundage of pots you create. And everyone in the class noticed right away, everyone, that the people who were working on the quantity, doing something every day, just trying things, their work was of a uniformly higher quality than the people who were trying to make the perfect piece. And there's a lot of thought in the digital world now, it's a terrible phrase, but in web creation and of iteration, placing a small bet every day and learning from that. That kind of learning pays compound interest, but you got to do it. You got to do. And that, as my talk addressed a little bit, we all know that gets easier every day. I love that story.
I think, Marcia, some of what you're bringing up is also, it's a change we're going to have to start making within our hiring policies and the kind of strategies and the people we bring into the organizations, you know? Like, I mean, Deborah took a risk on bringing me into this organization because I don't have a museum background. My background is in learning design and filmmaking and digital technologies. But so it means we're going to have to start rethinking that we can't just hire the people who super love the content and love the museum the way it was, but people are willing to think more abstractly about those concepts and look towards the future, like you're saying, using their imagination. And that is a little bit scary, but we're not going to be able to take those steps until we admit, like 12 steps, that we got a problem. And we kind of do have a problem right now because our visitorship is going down, you know? We know that we're not engaging the public on the deepest level that we could be. So that means that we got to start changing some of those things around it. And those institutions that are doing that now will be a step ahead in the future. And it's no longer just based on size and endowment and all those other things. It's going to be about strategy and adaptability. Those will be the ones who stand out and become leaders.
I'll just share a story with you. One of my favorite examples of kind of engaging a new audience is from the Oakland Museum. I don't suppose there's anyone from Oakland here, possibly in internet land. So they had this issue about attracting a younger demographic into the museums and had no money to do it, no marketing budget. So what they did was they picked a Friday and they called up half a dozen food trucks in Oakland. And they invited them to just park up outside the museum on a Friday night. They planned to leave the museum open and kind of just see what happened. Now, the thing with food trucks is they have their own followings. So the food trucks turned up and the people who eat the food turned up too. So the first Friday was apparently to the staff was a little worrying because the car park was empty. But when you walked around into the lot where the food trucks were, there were about 500 people there who had just turned up. Like I said, no PR, no formal marketing or promotion of the event, but it was a fantastic success. So 2 weeks later, they did the same thing. Dozen food trucks turned up. Oh, and by the way, so about 500 people turned up, and about half of them, I think, or a quarter, went into the museum at a reduced admission and engaged with the collection. So 2 weeks later, 12 food trucks turn up, 2,000 people turn up, and again, similar percentage of people, after experiencing the food and hanging out, they went into the museum. So now they have this ongoing program of Friday night, this new audience that they've engaged with, which was this entirely iterative process, which was completely risk averse. So after the first Friday, if nobody turned up, no harm, no foul. They didn't pay the food trucks. They could have just stopped it and thought of something else. But it was something that totally engaged with the audience that they were after. And that's the kind of thinking, I think, that we need to do in museums. That kind of iterative, small step, minimize the risk. I think I had a great quote from somebody about how museums fail to understand the difference between uncertainty and risk. So uncertainty is that complete unknown where you just have no idea what's going on, as opposed to risk, which is measured, failure. It's understanding the potential of failing and what it means, and minimizing it, and making a decision based on doing something about what you're going to do next.
And so Nick's framing it in a way that we're learning through the research we're doing currently, like I said, with the teens, with some of the surveying we're doing these things, that the problem may not be technology even in your institution, because it's not a solution, it's just a tool to support the visitor experience. The problem may actually be the seating is not comfortable, the wall labels are too difficult to read, that they don't understand how to navigate the museum space, that the front desk staff isn't friendly. There's all these different other layers that are tied into it. So to think that you'll get iPads and put them in will fix that is the wrong strategy. You may never even put in a piece of technology at a museum and still improve the experience and get more visitors that way and engage people on a more deeper level. So we got to think outside of just the technology box. It's really about the whole museum experience and those strategies we think about as the museum as a whole.
Yeah, and really, innovation isn't about the next shiny gadget. Innovation literally is about doing something different. It doesn't have to be cutting or bleeding edge. It could be something that somebody else is doing that you can tailor to, to your own environment. It's just about trying something new.
There was a time where the wall label was an innovative piece of technology in museums, or art museums at least, So, but now we don't even think about that anymore. And 50 years from now, nobody will even think about bring your own device or any of these things we have up on there. But what's the overall experience you're crafting?
Okay. Any more? Oh,
Down in the mosh pit.
yeah.
I guess just on a very practical level, how would you guys suggest going about creating a risk-safe environment for any nonprofit? And I mean, this goes beyond financially, I think, to also just making the space in and of itself sort of open to creativity potentially in places that might be a little bit more rooted in traditionalism.
I was just talking with an outside consultant who was hired to work with one of the Washington, D.C. museums, not a Smithsonian museum, who said that in his staff interviews, he found that junior staff, for lack of better words, had no shortage of ideas about what the institution should be doing, what was right, what was wrong, what could be tried, how much it would cost. They didn't know who to take the ideas to. There was no pathway for the development of concepts. There was no, governance is a very heavy word, but there was no clear idea within the institution of who had authority to decide. And so everyone had a back door to decision making. Everyone could lock that door and shut out everything. It was total chaos. Most institutions, I think, find that they've already got the ideas in-house somewhere in staff, just they haven't bothered to ask. I think the very first step for someone, board member, director, leader of an institution, is to just begin asking. If you have an idea, how would you get it done? Really, literally, it could be that simple.
I think the point, sorry, before you go, the point is, it's fine to make mistakes. It's just not fine to make the same mistake. And I think, you're always going to, when you try something new, there's always a potential that it's going to fail. But you've got to embrace that failure, and the so-called phrase, fail forward. So learn from it and move on, and don't dwell on it. We tend to, in the museum world, dwell on our failures, where I think we just brush them off and get on with it.
Yeah, let me jump in. So, and we've been having this conversation for 2 decades. There's failure and there's failure, right? So it's not the fail forward isn't a license to be stupid, or to do things without planning or thought. There are a lot of great techniques now for taking big ideas, breaking them into digestible small pieces. The design thinking workshops that happened here a few years ago demonstrate a proven methodology for taking big epic things, breaking them down into small daily exercises that test concepts with real users, create real benefits. So there's a lot that can be done here without the capital F happening.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to suggest something very practical, but I do this with my group every year, and it's one of my favorite days of the year. We go through the budget, and we say, at every line item, I just ask questions. We just say, do we still need that? Why do we need that? If we got rid of that, what would we lose? And at the end, we see, okay, what have we saved and what can we do differently with the resource that we've just shed? Like, just cut some things off. And we always say at the beginning of that conversation, nobody's going to lose their job. This isn't about cutting jobs or reducing hours or anything. This is about making sure that we're spending our time on the things that are of the greatest value. And I think in nonprofits, we have a tendency to continue to just add to our plate all the time. We're so mission-driven that every year we sit down, we brainstorm all the new things we could do, but we're all dying because we already have 3 jobs and we work 65 hours a week and, and lots of weekends. So I think if you start with what can we shed, like what are we doing habitually that really we don't have to do, and then look at that pool of available resource and say, now what can we do with that available resource that we weren't doing before? I think that can be a refreshing process.
So I come from the learning design world, which is a little bit different than design thinking. And in that design process, you don't do anything until you ask your audience first. And for me, that's the biggest step, because when you think about it, it doesn't cost you that much to do that. Yeah, you can do large-scale surveys and all these other things, but you can also go on social media and be like, what if we did this? And find out and see what they say, because that way you already have a determination that it may reach the people you're already trying to reach, I think a lot of times we experiment without having asked anybody, and we come up with really good ideas, and internally, we think they're really brilliant, but it doesn't mean make any impact on our audience. At the end of the day, we are not our audience. Like I'm an art snob, and no matter how much I try to be like them, I am not like them, although I do wear good shoes like my audience does.
I can confirm that. I can see them.
Super nice sneakers, by the way. But the thing is, like, I can't, as much as I may want to think I can empathize with them, at the end of the day, I need to, I need to actually get the data first and then make decisions from that. And so becoming a data-based decision-making organization where you're collecting that info, putting it together, and then making that decision, it minimizes the risk. It gives you an opportunity to actually work from where they're standing from rather than what we think is best. Because we just aren't the ones who we're serving. We're not serving ourselves. And the field has a little bit of a history of that recently. And it's maybe time for us to shift away from that so that we can actually make that impact that we want on the people that we want to serve.
Yeah, that reminds me of the data analytics side of the report. We're talking about some of the larger institutions like the Dallas Museum of Art doing the Friends program, but even some of the smaller organizations like the History Colorado Center, where all they did was change their POS system, and they started understanding their audience a little bit more, that 40% of their visitors were families, and they didn't have a family programs person on staff or much programs for them at all. So just that little change had them realize what kind of visitor they were serving, and they were able to actually create a position, and they increase their visitorship that way. So I mean, there's small things that you can do that can help you understand your audience better, and data analytics is one of those big areas.
Questions from the crowd? Yes.
It's kind of ironic that we're in an institution that started out as, it was called the Museum Without Walls, because now we're back into the Museum Without Walls, but it's all on the internet. It seems like content has become democratized to a large extent. And and it's happening out there whether we like it or not. How do we get in there and participate? Because we have our big names and everything, but then there's a lot going on that we're not in control of or participating in or mediating that conversation. And how do we get out of our walls?
Well, we talked about Wikipedia earlier on. There's a great study done by a tourism organization called PGAV Destinations, and I always quote this statistic now. So they did a study of when people are in your institution and they're looking at their phone, what are they looking for? What are they doing on their phone? And so they measured it in attractions, in amusement parks, but also museums and exhibitions. And what they found was that about half of the people on their phones were trying to find information about the thing that they were experiencing. So if they're in a museum looking at a collection object, chances are that they're trying to find more information about it because they're taught to look for this stuff. And the place that they're probably going to, if you are not leveraging that, if you are not putting your information and your content in an easily accessible way, they're going to find it from somewhere else. And they're probably going to find it from Wikipedia. So if you're not on Wikipedia, most of the content consumption that people are searching for is probably coming from Wikipedia. So I would encourage you to think about how you can engage with Wikipedia, which in and of itself can draw traffic, back to you if you do it in the right way, back to your institutional website. But really, folks are looking on their phone, they're engaged in your institution, they're texting their friends about the experience that they're having, so they're kind of ambassadors for you right then and there. When they're in your institution, they are your ambassadors momentarily. You need to leverage that kind of natural thing that they're doing.
I love that, and I love that question. And if you keep asking that question over the next year or two, you're going to be a black belt, super ninja at that. And I often talk about Joy's Law. Bill Joy was the co-founder of Sun Microsystems, and he said, whatever business you're in, most of the smart people work for someone else. And actually I met someone at a talk who used to work for Bill Joy, and he said, yeah, that was really true at Sun Microsystems. Most of the smart people did work for someone else. Be that as it may. So I think it comes down to mission, which locks in very well with all the talks today. Thinking about what problem it is your institution is chartered to solve, and who's most capable of making progress on that. Is it you within the sacrosanct walls of that organization, or is it possibly everyone else in the world? I'll often go into an organization and say, tell me the one thing you think you're best at, and then you can do a Google search that excludes that organization's properties from search results. And almost always, for any project they're cooking up, for any online community they want to create and have branded with their own, all the value creation arrows pointing back to them, there's a Flickr group, there's a YouTube channel that already has hundreds of thousands or millions of members on it doing exactly that thing. And then the challenge is, with all humility, to say, how can we help? How can we help? We don't need to do it all ourselves. How can we help you to be successful? I think that's exactly the right tactical question to ask.
Yeah, I just want to second that. I think sometimes we're so worried about keeping up with changes in communication technology that we forget that takes care of itself in a lot of ways. And what we can do is revisit things like our photography policy in the galleries, or our hours, Like if we want to ride the wave of what's happening with democratized content production, then let's do what we do really well, which is bring in exciting, mind-bending, spectacular works of art, or create new exhibits about, amazing areas of science that are little understood. Let's do that really well. Let's be really good at exhibition design. Let's be really open with our photography policy. Let's think about when people are able to come visit us. Maybe it's not between 10 and 5. Maybe it's between 5 and 8 because the people that we want to come visit us are at work. And maybe our stroller policy has been keeping women out of the galleries. That actually was the case at my museum. So let's change all that, and then let's let them create the content that they want to create. We don't have to beat them at it or be better at it, or we don't have to get out there and do all the work on Instagram. People are taking care of that for us. But what we know is, we did an exhibition of the work of Pierre Huyghe last year, and nobody knew who Pierre Huyghe was. We put out really great visuals, and we had an open photography policy in the gallery, and it just took care of itself. And there was a public conversation about Pierre Huyghe that we enabled by introducing an environment that looked really curious and made people want to come to us. But we didn't have to orchestrate the whole conversation or be the leader in every conversation. I had a great time at lunch. I have never been here before. I sent out all kinds of photos, and I texted all my friends. I was like, you got to come to Balboa Park, and I put it on Facebook, and Twitter. I wasn't thinking that I was helping. I wasn't looking for the official Balboa Park channel about those things. I was just I loved the environment. I loved that I could sit down. I just loved the feeling of it. I was excited to be part of it. And I think sometimes when we work in the institution, we forget that that's what people feel like when they're here. And if we make that part work really well, the rest will take care of itself in a lot of ways.
Again, going to where people are, that's really important, you know? Like, you don't need to make your own Facebook. You don't need to make your own YouTube. Who knows who the most subscribed person on YouTube is? Does anybody have an idea? Do you guys know?
Ashton Kutcher?
Mm-mm.
No.
I bet you, like, because all of us are, like, over 20, so we're not even going to know, and that's sad that it's even, like, that low now. His name is PewDiePie. He's from Sweden. He lives in England. He makes these things called play-along videos, where he plays video games, and has a little picture of him in the corner, and he, like, freaks out and, like, has all this commentary, and cultural critics describe them as aggressive stupidity, and yet he has, so how many did the Brotherhood have? 2.5 million subscribers, something like that?
Yeah, the Vlog Brothers?
Yeah. 36 million subscribers to PewDiePie's pages. It's enormous. Like, the scale is giant. So don't go outside of those things. Get on YouTube. If your organization is not figuring out about how you can use YouTube, and you don't have to necessarily, but don't think you got to put it somewhere else. Go to where the people already are and provide your content because they're looking for it. That's what the thing exists for, and it's free and open for you to be there for. And then participate in it, because YouTube is actually the most used social network. We tend to think of it as Facebook or Instagram and these other things, but it's all about the commentary and the discussion and all those things. So are you participating in that?
Also, just invite those people to the venue. Like, we have these breakfasts now where we just have a small group of social media influencers who aren't hard to find because they have bajillions of followers online. Just like, come in, we'll have you in before open hours, we'll serve you a nice breakfast, we're gonna show you the work of some artists who you've never heard of before and tell you why it's cool. And then we just stand back and they do what they do so well. You know, they're media channels in their own right.
And I think this isn't about marketing. You know, none of this is about marketing. Reddit grew to be its incredible size. I think they spent $80 on marketing. They bought stickers at South by Southwest once. This isn't about reskinning, what's the expression, lipstick on a pig. It's not about brand strategies. It's about doing things that are genuinely useful to people. The thought leader, Kathy Sierra, as a social media thought leader, she said in the old days, the equation was follow me, buy my product, visit my venue because I'm great. You know, we've got the biggest marble columns in San Diego and the biggest venue. And she says now the equation is friend me, buy my product, visit me because I help make you great. And that's why the Vlog Brothers can scale to the size. It's genuinely trying to help people lead successful lives.
Because it's social media in regards to that. You know, like, think about how you use social media in your personal life, but then think about how you use it in the museum, which is primarily for marketing, right? Like, it's about building relationships with people online. So how are you having those conversations with them? You know, like, how is it that you actually have that dialogue and are part of their lives and they're part of your life versus this institutional gap?
So let me ask, how many of your social media people are in the marketing department?
Yeah, but that's okay. So I think there's an evolutionary sequence that happens where you got to get that first hire and you got to put them into an existing department, and it's going to be one of 3 or 4 X depending on how you're set up. A lot of it has to do with personalities in small institutions. After a few years, you wind up maybe creating a separate department for that, but it's still a couple levels down from the director. And then as time goes on, you see institutions start to move responsibility for those roles into a cross-disciplinary team up in the executive office. This is just this natural. I've stopped worrying about where the social media person is and started just looking for that flow.
That's your trust idea that you talked about.
I'm sorry.
No, that was just the trust idea that you had earlier. I mean, that's what that sounds like to me, is being able to have somebody and establish trust and be able to share that.
Deborah.
I just wanted to mention, we had a short meeting today where we talked about perhaps one of the new guards that we've just hired might do the social media and something, you know, from the floor or on the street, or because we can't always be there and we want the people at the front line to be greeters. So again, it's about not worrying and empowering people to start communicating and feeling like they have a voice as well. So that's one thing. There were 2 things that came up a little earlier that I think are really important and that many museums don't really take into account. And one is sort of cutting back when you have new ideas so that you can do what you do well. And making those decisions, I think, are really important. And the other was, again, the conversation on failure, I thought was very, very important. There's failure, and then there's successful failure, where you've thought about it, you know, put some energy into really thinking about it, and it may not work. But then you don't hide it. You're transparent about it, so other people, other organizations can learn. And if you begin to invest your institution and your staff in thinking that way, then it's okay. And then they feel that there are opportunities to think outside the box.
Yeah, Nick and I co-led a session at AAM in 2009 called Good Projects Gone Bad, where we tried to do that. And there's through research for that session, I found a Harvard business study, 45 years of global business, found the key differentiator between the top performing business in any sector and the also-rans, a difference of sometimes thousands of percentage of performance in terms of money and profit. The top performers had cultures in which they routinely shared experiences of failure within the institutions. The rest did not. I thought that was pretty startling.
After that, I did a session called, when I was at the Getty, Epic Fail. It's online somewhere.
But I think we need to up our game in the failure conversation. There's a lot of cheap fail forward, just kind of gets repeated. I think it bears more thought than we're giving it.
And see, I mean, I love Deborah. I love that example of giving it to the security guard. You know, try it. I mean, if it doesn't work out, give it to somebody else. I mean, you know, the thing about social media is you make a mistake and it's for 2 seconds it's a problem and then everyone's forgotten about it. I mean, that's the you know, the flux and the dynamism in that environment is just, there's no point in worrying about making a mistake.
And what we can learn from the design world is about rapid prototyping and using tools that we already own and have all over the place within our institutions to try something out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, then we haven't lost much at all, maybe some manpower time. But things like PowerPoint, or even like, you know, most of our institutions have giant sheets of paper we can just drag out and give people markers and have them try something out and shift the stuff around. There's lots of practices that we can imbue in our own practice that will then help us to make these better decisions in the future. And it will cost us almost nothing. And that way you're not so set on the end goal of the product, but the process of getting to that product.
And
One last thing.
And that leads to something else I was hoping you would talk about, Nick, is that process. We have a park with multiple institutions in one location, and with the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, which can help drive the conversation in a bigger way. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think the approach, so, you know, it's bad enough that you're in a museum trying to figure out a strategy for engagement with the audiences, then, you know, 27 cultural institutions. I have gray hair for a reason. I mean, I think the way, again, and we talked about this, the way to attack that is you've got to break it down into manageable chunks. So break it down within the institutions and break it down in the across the whole park, and then kind of build it up. It's much easier to, when you build something complex, you don't go from zero to complexity, you just start building this thing together. There's a great quote from Malcolm Gladwell, which is kind of my guiding principle when he talks about how to create an epidemic. You know, how do you create this kind of massive movement thing? And the way you do it is you create these small epidemics across whatever the environment is, and then these small epidemics kind of self-aggregate and form into a much larger one. And so really that's the approach that I'm attempting to take. So come back to the 2020 Smith Symposium, and I'll be bald by then, probably. So we are at time. Any last thoughts from our panelists? No, good, that's the spirit. Okay, no, go ahead.
Well, you're making me... There's something called Gall's law, G-A-L-L-S law. It comes from physics, and it says that no successful complex system evolved from an unsuccessful simple system. And all successful simple systems evolved from, all successful complex systems evolved from successful simple systems. And I think one of the challenges for Balboa Park is this fabric that you've created. How much of that would you be willing to weed away or trim away if you found it was impeding your progress, slowing you down? It's a very difficult and amazing thing you're doing. But what would you be willing to walk away from if you found that you could use your resources more successfully somewhere else? Will incrementally improving what you're doing over the next 20 years get you to the place you want to be in 2040, 2050? Or are you going to have to place a bigger, bolder bet somewhere? And if so, who's going to make that call?
I'm just reminding myself of that 7 stages of grief. So here is the short link to the report. If you would join me in thanking our panelists.